The paper grocery bag slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. The loaf of bread bounced out and rolled beneath the entryway bench, followed by a can of beans that spun in place before toppling. I didn't move to pick them up. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway of the house I hadn't even finished unpacking. Bree was in the hallway with a tape measure stretched taut from one side of the guest room doorway to the other. Ezra. My son was halfway down the hall with his sleeves rolled up and clipboard in hand, where he'd even found a clipboard I couldn't guess. And there, near the far bedroom, stood Bree's mother, arms crossed, nodding to herself like she'd just discovered something useful. Ezra turned first. "Mom," he said, voice calm, matter of fact, like he was announcing dinner was ready. "You're home early." I stared at him. "We already decided," he added. I didn't answer. Couldn't really. My keys were still dangling from my fingers. The only sound in the room was the ticking wall clock I had just hung yesterday. Every breath felt heavier than it should have. Bree didn't even look surprised. "We assumed you'd be at the bank till 5, she said, winding the tape measure back with a loud snap. "We were going to leave a note." I stepped forward. The floor creaked beneath me. "How did you get in?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. Ezra's eyes shifted. "You gave me that spare key. For emergencies. I gave you that key 3 days ago. You said you wanted to drop off a welcome basket." "We did," Bree chimed in. "And while we were here, we figured it made sense to get a head start." "Head start," I echoed. Bree's mother moved toward me now, casual, smiling like we were old friends. "It's a beautiful layout, Corliss. The boys would do well here. That bay window's a dream for reading light." Ezra looked at me then, and there was something tired, defensive in his eyes. "We just figured, this house has more space than you really need. It's got 3 bedrooms. Bree's mom is only here short-term. We'd stay in the back wing, give you your own space. That way, everyone wins." I didn't speak. Not when Bree added, "You won't even know we're here half the time," or when her mother ran a hand along the hallway trim and said, "With a bit of paint, this could really shine." I walked past them all and into the kitchen. My coffee mug still sat on the counter, cold now. I picked it up, but didn't drink. I needed something solid in my hand. Something that was mine. When I turned back to face them, they had gathered near the island. Ezra stepped forward. "Mom, don't make this into a thing. We just thought after everything this would make the most sense. You've been so alone since Dad passed." I felt the heat behind my eyes, not from grief, but from disbelief. "I didn't buy this house to fix your overcrowding problem," I said. Finally, Ezra's expression hardened. "We were trying to help." "No," I replied. "You were trying to move in." Bree opened her mouth to object, but I raised a hand. "I need you all to leave." "Seriously?" Bree asked. Over a misunderstanding, I looked at Ezra. I said leave. He hesitated. Then without another word, he nodded to Bree and her mother. They walked past me with a silence that tried to make itself righteous. The door clicked shut behind them. I stood alone in the cottage, my breath echoing in the space they had just occupied. It was the first time I realized how quickly your home can stop feeling like your own. I sat at the kitchen table that night. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I just kept thinking about how easy it had been for them to walk into my house like it was theirs. Like I was a placeholder. 3 months ago, I signed the papers for this cottage in silence. Not out of spite. Not even to surprise anyone. I just didn't tell them. Not Ezra. Not Bree. No, guess what? I bought a house phone call. No photo updates. No group texts with listings for feedback I never really got anyway. It wasn't a grand plan. It was just quiet. Like me. After Henry died, Ezra and Bree barely looked up from their own lives. There was no space for my grief in their schedules. Ezra said all the right words, but always with one eye on his phone. Bree offered casseroles that stayed untouched in the fridge because I couldn't eat anything for weeks. They came to the funeral left early for the kids' soccer game and never asked if I wanted help sorting through the attic. I did it alone. When they bought their house last year, I found out the day after they moved in. We didn't want to bother you with the process, Ezra said. I didn't ask why I was suddenly a bother. I just smiled and dropped off a set of garden tools with a ribbon around the handle. So when my lease ended in March, I started looking on my own. A cottage on the edge of Ashfield, quiet, with a patch of earth in the back, just big enough for vegetables and coffee in the sun. A fireplace I didn't need, but wanted. It reminded me of the one Henry and I used to sit beside after dinner when Ezra had finally gone to bed. The first time I walked through this place, something in me settled. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing had been for years. I hired a buyer's agent and told her, "Please don't involve my family. I want to do this on my own." When the sale closed, I took a photo of the front door and saved it to my phone. Just for me. I'd planned to tell Ezra eventually, after I'd painted the walls, unpacked, the books, planted something. But then life moved as it does, and the silence became a comfort. I liked having something that wasn't filtered through their opinions or their needs. Still, part of me worried I was being unfair, that by keeping it to myself, I was drawing a line they hadn't meant to cross. But that line wasn't new. It had been there since Henry's death, maybe even before. When I finally invited them over last week just for coffee, no tour, they barely stayed 20 minutes. Bree had a yoga class. Ezra answered 3 work calls. Bree's mother wasn't even supposed to be in town. But now I knew better. They hadn't left that day because they were busy. They left because they'd already seen everything they needed. I reached for the key and slid it into a small dish near the sink. Then I pulled open the drawer beneath it and found the notepad where I'd written my to-do list: trim the hedges, restock cleaning supplies, find curtains for the office. I picked up a pen and added a new line change: the locks. The first bin showed up 2 days later. It was sitting just inside the garage door when I came back from the grocery store. Bright blue with a yellow lid labeled in Bree's neat handwriting: winter coats, boys. I stood there staring at it, bags still in my arms, trying to decide if it was a mistake. It wasn't. By the end of the week, there were 8 bins lined against the far wall. One labeled books, nursery, another toys. Soft. Then came a playpen, folded and leaning beside the dryer like it had always belonged there. I hadn't spoken to any of them since asking them to leave. I'd assumed they took the message, but apparently silence wasn't enough. I found Ezra on Saturday afternoon, crouched by the side door wires, exposed drill in hand. "Hey, Mom," he said, without looking up. "Almost done here. The keypad will make things simpler." For whom I asked. He glanced over his shoulder. "Everyone." I didn't answer. He kept working. "This way we don't need to bother you if we're coming in late," he added. "You can sleep through it." I blinked. Coming in late for what? Ezra finally stood up, brushing his palms against his jeans. "Look, I know you've been hesitant, but we talked about it. Bree and I. And Mom," he added, nodding toward Bree's mother, who appeared around the corner with a plastic bag of air fresheners. "We can make this work." She smiled like I should be proud of their planning. "The nursery space is lovely," she said, motioning toward the guest room. "Plenty of morning light, not too drafty." I didn't correct her. Bree arrived 20 minutes later with another load in the back seat of her car. She gave me a tight-lipped nod, handed Ezra a bag labeled bath linens, and walked straight through the house without asking. I followed them down the hallway, each step louder than the last on the hardwood floors I had mopped that morning. The office door was already propped open. Ezra had moved the desk into the corner. "We'll just need to shift this out to the garage," he said, gesturing. "It's too sharp around the edges for kids." My voice cracked before I meant it to. This is my home office. He paused. You said you were retired. I said I was retired from drafting, I replied. Not from thinking. Not from reading. Not from needing space. Ezra opened his mouth, but Bree beat him to it. We're not trying to take anything from you, she said. We just assumed you'd want to be part of something bigger than yourself. Something bigger. I'd heard that before from Henry when he took that job that moved us across the country without asking. From Ezra when he moved me into his basement and told me I'd be grateful not to live alone. From Bree when she said we should share a Christmas tree instead of me decorating that sad little fake one alone. But this wasn't about space, or efficiency, or family togetherness. This was about being erased politely. I stood in the middle of my hallway, surrounded by their voices, their bins, their needs, and I saw it clearly for the first time. They never planned to leave. Later that night, I opened the notebook again and crossed out curtains on my to-do list. I replaced it with one word: locksmith. The screenshots came the next morning while I was standing at the sink, rinsing out the coffee pot. My phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time, in rapid succession. I dried my hands and opened the messages. They were from Andrea, a woman I used to work with, someone who had a knack for knowing things before they were meant to be known. Her first text was short. Thought you should see this. Sorry. Attached were 6 images, each one a screenshot of a group chat. I didn't recognize the group title. At first, it looked like Nonsense Operation Cottage, the kind of label people use when they're being playful about something serious. The first message was from Bree. Timeline update, hoping to be fully moved in by June 1st. Playroom first priority. Then her mother chimed in. Got the rug from storage. Can bring over the bunk beds next week. And Ezra. Need to find a gentle way to push Mom into it. Maybe frame it as safety. She's not getting younger. My hand tightened around the phone. The chat continued: plans for rearranging furniture, where to put the crib, discussions of bathroom sharing. They referred to the guest room as the nursery without hesitation. Bree mentioned ordering blackout curtains. Her mother asked if Ezra had spoken to the bank yet. Ezra replied, working on it. One message hit harder than the rest. It was from Bree. She won't fight it. She never does. I sat down at the table before my knees gave out. It wasn't just that they were moving in. It was that they'd already decided they had the right. That my silence, my default mode, was the same thing as agreement. That the life I had carved out for myself, alone but peaceful, was merely a placeholder until they needed it. I stared at Ezra's words, rereading the line again and again. Push Mom into it. Not talk to, not ask, not invite. Push. That night I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't cook. I didn't even pretend to go through the motions of winding down for the day. I sat with the phone in my lap and reread the screenshots until I could recite them. Then I printed them, put them in a folder, labeled it with a single word: proof. Afterwards, I made tea, strong, too hot, bitter, but I drank it anyway. I stood at the back window, watching the light spill across the fence posts, and tried to remember the last time Ezra had asked me what I wanted, not what I could offer. It was years ago. Maybe never. They were building a life on top of mine, and they hadn't even asked if the foundation was sound. By morning, I'd made a list. A real one this time, not in the margins of my grocery pad or scribbled on the back of an envelope. Locksmith. Lawyer. Post office redirect. Ezra's key retrieve. Speak to HOA. Record everything. I copied the screenshots onto a flash drive and tucked it into the side pocket of my purse. The bins were still in the garage. The keypad was still installed. But I was no longer undecided. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app I'd downloaded the night before. The camera feed showed a clear view of the driveway, the side gate, and the back door. Nothing had happened yet, but now I'd be watching. It started with junk mail. A flyer for a children's furniture catalog addressed to Bree Calloway, current resident. I stared at it thinking it must be a fluke. Some algorithm, maybe. Then came a postcard from a local daycare center, and then a billing statement from the utility company with Bree's name listed as secondary contact. My name was still there, but smaller beneath hers. That was when I called the post office. I waited 15 minutes on hold, tapping my pen against the kitchen counter until someone named Marcia finally answered. Her voice was bright and pleasant, like she was trying to make up for whatever delay had come before. "Yes, I'm calling to ask about a recent address change," I said. "I believe someone submitted a forwarding request or added names without my consent." She paused. "What's the address I gave it?" She clicked her keyboard for a while. "Looks like we've got a household update request here. Effective last Thursday. Lists 2 additional names including Bree Calloway and a Margaret Jansen." My heart thudded once slow and deep. "I didn't submit that." "I understand, ma'am. Unfortunately, these forms can be submitted online. All someone needs is basic information about the residents. If you'd like to revoke the update, I can send you a form for verification and ID. I'd like that," I said, gripping the edge of the counter. "Immediately." She promised to email it by end of day. I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened my drawer, pulled out my notebook, and added a new line under the list I'd been building: reclaim postal access. Next was the HOA. I didn't expect trouble there, but after what I'd seen in that group chat, I didn't trust a single thing anymore. Marvin, the HOA secretary, sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh yes, Ms. Devereaux. We've been in touch with your daughter-in-law's mother regarding some planned modifications. She mentioned possibly converting the second bedroom into a nursery and asked for paint color pre-approval. We've got her listed as designated occupant on file now." I sat down slowly. "Who gave her that designation?" Well, I could hear papers shuffling. It was submitted via the homeownership transition packet. You're still listed as the legal owner, of course, but the file indicates a multi-generational residence is being established. I didn't submit that packet. Oh, well then it seems we'll need to pause all changes until this is cleared up. "Yes," I said with every ounce of calm I could summon. "I think that would be wise." After I hung up, I went straight to the filing cabinet in the hallway and pulled out my mortgage folder. The final documents weren't even dry. The ink was fresh. The payments hadn't started. And already they were phasing me out of the picture like I was some elderly guest overstaying her welcome. I made photocopies of everything, printed the emails from the post office, took photos of the junk mail and logged dates, created a binder, the kind of thing Henry used to call over-preparing. It didn't feel like overkill now. It felt like survival. That night, I stood in the garage staring at the bins lined against the wall. Bree had stacked them so neatly like she was nesting in someone else's life and didn't even need to ask first. I reached out and flipped one of the labels upside down, then another, then a third. I couldn't stop them from bringing things in, but I could make it clear none of this was settled. Not yet. The last time I saw my wedding ring, it was sitting in a velvet pouch on a glass counter at McLaren's Pawn. The man behind the counter weighed it like it meant nothing. He didn't ask why I was selling it. I didn't offer. That was 10 years ago. Ezra had gotten into an engineering program out of state. The tuition was steep, and he'd already burned through his scholarship trying to switch majors. He called late one night. His voice, small, rushed. "I don't want to drop out, Mom," he said. "But we're short." He didn't ask directly. He didn't have to. Henry was already gone by then, and I was barely holding things together still at the drafting firm during the day and waitressing weekends at a diner off Route 7. I was tired, stretched thin, but I told him, "Of course I'll help." Then I quietly sold the ring Henry gave me on our 10th anniversary and wired the money to Ezra the next morning. He never asked where it came from. After that, it became a pattern. Double shifts, canceled trips, quiet sacrifices that no one tallied but me. I remember clipping coupons for weeks to buy him a decent winter coat when he moved to Minneapolis. When Bree entered the picture, I didn't hesitate to help them furnish their first apartment. They were saving for a wedding. I gave them $3,000 as a gift. They used it to cover the deposit on a venue I wasn't invited to tour. I sent them grocery money the first year they had Mason, their oldest. Bree had stopped working, and Ezra's contract job was on shaky ground. They didn't tell me that directly, but I could tell by the way he sounded on the phone. Tense. Short. I used to think that kind of intuition was a mother's gift. Now I wonder if it's just training. When they bought their first house, I emptied out a CD I'd been saving since Henry passed. It was meant to be for a trip to Ireland. I'd always wanted to see the cliffs he talked about from his Navy days. But they called in a panic. The bank had miscalculated their closing costs. They were going to lose the deal if they didn't make up the difference by Monday. I didn't even blink. I wired the funds. Bree sent me a heart emoji. Ezra left a voicemail. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. They never paid it back. I never asked. And somehow, over time, all those acts became invisible. Expected. When Bree mentioned converting my guest room into a nursery, she used the phrase, finally, enough space, as if they'd earned it. As if I was lucky to be part of their plan. Ezra never even looked ashamed. I stood in the hallway that afternoon, staring at the framed photo of Henry in his uniform, the one I kept near the coat closet. He would have told me to draw the line sooner. He would have seen what I couldn't, that I'd raised a man who had learned how to take. The sacrifices weren't what I regretted. What I regretted was how easily they were forgotten. That night, I opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet and pulled out the manila folder marked Estate. Henry. Tucked inside were documents most people don't think about until it's too late. But I had always prepared for the worst. As I flipped through the pages, I found the clause I was looking for, and I began to underline it. I waited until their cars pulled out of the driveway. Ezra's truck first, then Bree's SUV with the rear packed full of weekend errands and recycled grocery bags. Bree's mother was last waving like a queen as she backed out sunglasses perched on her head like a crown she hadn't earned. I didn't wave back. I watched from the window until the street was quiet. Then I called the locksmith. He arrived in 23 minutes, an older man named Paul, polite, efficient, and with no questions beyond the ones he needed to do his job. 4 doors, he asked, glancing at the front, side, back, and garage entry. Yes. All of them, I said. Fresh hardware. No duplicates. He nodded. Do you need new keys coded too? Yes, I said again. Only 1 copy, and it stays with me. He worked quickly. The smell of metal filings and lubricant drifted faintly into the house as he drilled and swapped out each lock one by one. I stayed close, watching every screw go in, as if the act of witnessing it made it more real. By the time he was done, it was just past noon. Test each door, he said, handing me the new key. I did. Front side back garage. Each one clicked open and locked again under my hand. Each one responded only to me. Paul packed up his tools and handed me a receipt. If anyone tries to tamper with these, he said, call the police. They'd have to damage the whole frame to get through. I nodded and thanked him. Once he was gone, I opened the garage and began hauling the bins out. One by one, I carried them to the front porch. I didn't rush. I took my time keeping everything neat, stacking each container so nothing would fall. 8 in total. I set them in 2 rows beside the doormat, just far enough from the door to send a message, but close enough for them to know I hadn't touched the contents. Then I went back inside, printed 8 identical labels, and taped 1 to each lid. Not welcome. I chose that phrase carefully. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't angry. It was just the truth. They were not welcome, not in my rooms, not in my space, not in my life unless they remembered how to ask. I stood inside, just past the threshold, and watched the bins through the front window. The plastic glinted under the afternoon sun. A wind picked up and blew one of Bree's scarves out of a cracked bin. I let it stay there, fluttering on the ground. They hadn't asked to move in. They assumed. They drafted plans. They changed addresses. They let themselves believe I was a vessel, something to hold their lives when it became inconvenient to manage on their own. But I wasn't a vessel. I was a woman who had given enough. The door was mine now, and behind it, the life I still had left. Later that evening, I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, sat in the living room, and began drafting an email to my lawyer. I attached the scanned screenshots, the mail records, the HOA statement, and the clause from Henry's estate. Then I wrote the subject line in bold letters, intent to establish boundary. The voicemail came at 7:42 a.m. I heard it before I saw it, my phone buzzing against the table just as I was pouring the last of the coffee into my mug. Unknown number. No message preview. I let it go to voicemail, watched it log, and waited a full 10 minutes before I pressed play. It was Bree's mother. Her voice was cold, sugar, brittle, and saccharine. Corliss, she began, as if we were old friends who had simply had a misunderstanding over luncheon. I'm calling as a courtesy before we escalate this further. You may not be aware, but when families co-invest in a property, there are legal considerations, especially when minors are involved. She cleared her throat. If you continue to behave irrationally, we will be forced to explore our options. Ezra and Bree have spoken with a real estate mediator. I suggest you return their calls before things become unnecessarily unpleasant. The message ended with a long pause, as if she'd expected me to interrupt. I saved it. Then I emailed it to myself, filed it in the same folder where everything else had gone. The screenshots, the junk mail, the mailbox affidavit, the scanned locks invoice. By 9 o'clock, Ezra texted, "We need to talk. Can I come by?" I didn't respond. At 10:30, he knocked on the front door. I waited a moment, then opened it, keeping my body angled to block the view behind me. He stood there, with his shoulders hunched, eyes tired. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Mom," he said softly, "this has gotten out of hand." "Has it?" I asked. "You didn't need to humiliate Bree like that. Putting the bins out, leaving her things in the open. What did that prove? That I have a front porch," I said. "And boundaries." He exhaled. "You've always said we're family." I nodded. "I said that when you still acted like it." He winced. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is helping someone through college, through rent, through 3 moves and 2 down payments only, to find out you've been written out of your own life like a side character. We weren't trying to write you out. You were trying to write over me." Ezra didn't answer right away. He looked down at the porch step, then back up at me. "We thought we were solving something. You've seemed lonely since Dad died." I thought, "No, I cut in. You didn't think. You planned. You mapped. You rearranged. You called it a family solution. But you didn't ask. Not once." He rubbed a hand over his jaw the way Henry used to when he was caught between wanting to apologize and not knowing how. "She's angry," he said. "Bree. Her mom, too. They're talking about mediation, about your mental clarity." My eyes narrowed. "Are they?" Ezra hesitated. "I'm not saying I agree, but maybe if you'd just let them back in for a conversation?" "No," I said again. "We're past that now." I stepped back just enough to gesture toward the camera above the door. The red light blinked softly. "Let your wife and her mother know that the locks are changed, the footage is archived, and the next threat that comes through will go straight to my attorney." He stared at me. Not with anger, not even disbelief, just confusion, like he didn't understand how I'd gotten here. But I understood. I closed the door and clicked the lock. Then I went back to my desk and pulled up my lawyer's reply. The subject line was clear, prepared to proceed. I hadn't stepped into Mr. Mallory's office in years. The place still smelled like cedar and worn leather, just like it did the day Henry and I sat across from him to draft the living trust. I remember Henry holding my hand tightly under the table, more nervous than he ever looked during his deployments. Now I walked in alone. Mallory greeted me like no time had passed. His hair was thinner, his glasses newer, but the weight of his gaze was the same. Corliss. He said, "What brings you in?" I sat down and pulled the folder from my bag, laying it on the desk. I need to review the trust, the final version, especially the conditional clauses. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. He reached into his cabinet, pulled out a labeled binder, and began flipping pages. "We haven't touched this since the revision 5 years ago," he said, "right after Henry's surgery." I nodded. That had been the second cancer scare, the one he beat. The one we thought meant more time. He was the one who asked for the additions. Just in case, he said. Just to be safe. Mallory found the page and rotated it toward me. I didn't need to read it word for word. I knew what I was looking for. Henry's handwriting was still faintly visible in the margins from the draft copy notes that had been typed up into the final clause. If at any time our son Ezra Devereaux engages in coercive behavior or attempts to manipulate Corliss Devereaux's living arrangements, financial holdings, or personal rights, the clause read, he shall forfeit all beneficiary entitlements, including but not limited to property trust disbursements and financial assets held jointly or separately by the estate. I sat back in the chair and let the air settle. "You remember this?" Mallory asked gently. "I remember every word." Henry hadn't wanted to include it, not at first, but he also knew his son, the way Ezra deferred to others when it suited him. How easily he shifted blame. How he always assumed someone else would clean up after the mess. Henry said it with no bitterness, just clarity. "Ezra's a good man," he told me once, "but he's never been asked to be a careful one." So we put in the clause. Quietly. Legally. I looked up at Mallory. "What would I need to initiate it?" He hesitated only a second before reaching for a form. Written complaint. Documentation. A brief summary of events. "You said you had something." I nodded and handed over the printed screenshots, the voicemail transcript, the notarized mail correction letter, the HOA reversal, and the security footage timestamps, all neatly tabbed. He flipped through them slowly. "This is significant." I said nothing. I didn't need him to tell me what I already knew. He tapped his pen against the desk once. "Are you certain I'm ready to file?" I said, but not to notify. He met my eyes. Understood. Silent activation. No announcement. It sits on file unless triggered. I nodded. We completed the paperwork in silence. It took less than 20 minutes. By the end, a sealed envelope with Ezra's name on it sat in the outbox on Mallory's credenza. Waiting. Contingent. Not yet delivered. But alive. On my way out, I paused at the door and glanced back. Mallory gave me a small nod, the kind of nod that acknowledged something beyond law. Dignity, maybe. Or resolve. When I stepped into the sunlight, the wind shifted and brushed across my shoulders like a weight lifted. By the time I got home, another bin had been dropped at the edge of the driveway. No note. No knock. Just a silent threat wrapped in childhood toys and folded baby clothes. I carried it back to the porch and set it right beside the others. Then I went inside and emailed Mallory. One final line, file complete. Hold until breach. The envelope came with pastel balloons on the corner and glitter pressed into the lettering. It was hand-delivered, slipped through the mail slot like a secret. I picked it up, thinking it was another apology attempt. or maybe a real conversation starter. But as soon as I turned it over and saw the names, I knew better. "You're invited," it read in gold script. "Please join us for a baby shower honoring Bree Calloway. Location Corliss Devereux's cottage. Saturday at 2 p.m. My cottage. My name. Used as a location, not as a person. The invitation didn't even bother to pretend I'd be hosting. Just there. Like a rental hall. Like a place they'd booked and forgot to ask about. I stood by the kitchen counter for a long time, reading the card over and over. The RSVP had been routed to Bree's mother, of course. A cheerful little Gmail account listed just below a registry link. They had already sent this to people. Probably dozens, maybe more. Guests planning outfits, gifts, dishes to bring, all without a single confirmation from the person who owned the floor they were planning to stand on. It wasn't just presumptuous, it was calculated. I opened the drawer where I kept the shredder tucked neatly between unpaid bills and spare batteries. I slid the invitation in slowly, letting the teeth tear through it strip by strip, until nothing remained but golden confetti caught in plastic. Then I pulled out a blank card from the stationery set I hadn't used in years. My handwriting was slow, deliberate. You can't throw parties in a place you tried to steal. No dear Bree. No love mom. No softening. I folded the note, placed it in an envelope, and walked it out to the mailbox before I could second-guess myself. By the time I returned inside, the security camera app had already pinged an alert that someone had walked up the drive earlier that morning. Ezra. Delivering it himself, probably. Not even a knock. Just the assumption that I would play along. But I didn't. Later that night, I heard from Andrea again. Another message. A forwarded email someone had screenshotted from a group thread labeled Cottage Shower Planning. One line stood out. "If we just show up and start decorating, she won't want to make a scene in front of the guests." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I finally did. They weren't just hoping I'd give in. They were counting on my silence, my politeness, my shame. But shame doesn't live here anymore. That night, I printed the email, added it to the file, and then I drafted one more letter. To the local police department non-emergency line, I explained that I was the sole legal occupant and owner of the property, that I had evidence of an event being planned on my premises without consent, that I was requesting an officer on standby that Saturday in case of disturbance. I faxed it over before bed and slept through the night. When Saturday arrived, I sipped my coffee at the window and watched the cars begin to slow in front of my house. Balloons in trunks, crockpots on laps, confused expressions as they pulled into the driveway and saw the sign taped firmly to the front door. Event canceled. Private property. No trespassing. One by one, the cars backed out. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with a single text from Ezra. "You really didn't have to humiliate her." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the folder labeled Proof, Phase 2, and began reviewing the next step. The hearing wasn't loud or dramatic. No one raised their voice. No chairs got slammed and no one cried. But somehow, it cut deeper than any fight we'd ever had. It started with a form I filed online, just a basic fraud complaint. I included screenshots from the baby shower registry, where the property was listed as event venue, graciously provided, and the digital flyer that clearly named my address as the Calloway Family Cottage. That was the phrase that did it, like I'd been absorbed into their branding. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to repurpose me. It was just the first time I pushed back publicly. The HOA board met on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. I sat in the second row, a manila folder balanced on my lap legs crossed at the ankle, like I was back at one of Ezra's middle school parent-teacher nights. Bree's mother walked in, wearing a coral blazer and pearls, smiling like she still thought charm could undo documentation. Bree followed close behind her mouth, said in a firm line. Ezra didn't come. There were 6 board members, 3 of whom I'd spoken to in the past, only about lawn maintenance and mailbox repairs. But now I knew them by name, because I'd sent each of them a personalized packet detailing the fraudulent use of my address for short-term rental income and unauthorized events. When they called my name, I stepped up, placed the folder on the table, and spoke clearly. I didn't add anything dramatic, just the facts, the timeline, the evidence, the repeated attempts to register my property for shared business use, all without my consent. The emails between Bree's mother and a local rental site representative discussing revenue opportunities from the space. Projected income from just the nursery room is nearly $900 monthly. One email read. My voice didn't shake. Not once. They asked questions. I answered. I sat back down. Then it was Margaret Jansen's turn. Bree's mother. She opened with a chuckle and said she must have misunderstood the rules, which immediately raised eyebrows. Someone on the board pointed out that she wasn't even listed as a resident. Another asked how a non-owner could be seeking permits for a property she didn't occupy. Margaret shifted in her seat. Bree shot daggers at me from across the room. When the board voted, the results were unanimous. Her permit applications were denied. Her ability to register or represent any home in the HOA was revoked for 5 years. A formal censure was issued and entered into record. What hit hardest, though, was the clause that followed any future permit submitted for short-term rental purposes under the Callaway name would require signed notarized approval from me. The moment the decision was announced, Bree stood and walked out. No words, no argument, just left the room like it was beneath her. Margaret lingered behind, pretending to check her phone while the others cleared out. I didn't say a word to her. I just picked up my folder and walked past, steady and silent. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel for a moment, feeling the relief wash through me, not triumph exactly, just a reclaimed quiet. The next morning, I got an alert from the county records portal. A permit application for Callaway Cottage LLC had been officially withdrawn. That afternoon, I received a Venmo request labeled Shared Loss of Income, Family Business Opportunity. I declined it without blinking. Then I opened my inbox and clicked on the draft labeled Executor Addendum, Activation Clause. It was Mrs. Ellery from 2 houses down who knocked on my door just after sunset, holding a flash drive in her hand like it was something sacred. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, she said, shifting awkwardly on the porch. But I saw something I think you ought to have. I invited her in and poured her a cup of coffee, the good kind I keep for guests. She didn't stay long, just enough time to set the flash drive on my kitchen table and explain. It was a few weeks ago, she said before all the signs went up. I noticed a car parked in front of your place during the middle of the day. I didn't recognize it, so I checked my doorbell camera just in case. She paused, stirring her coffee but not drinking it. I didn't know what I was seeing at first. But after the HOA meeting, well, I thanked her. She waved it off. You don't owe anyone an explanation, she said quietly. Some people just think kindness is weakness, but they're wrong. When she left, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and opened the file. The footage was sharp, clearer than mine. The timestamp rolled as Bree's mother stepped out of the driver's seat of a silver sedan, a lanyard with keys swinging from her hand. She approached my side door, casually tried one key. It didn't work. She tried another, then another. The 4th key seemed to go in, but didn't turn. She looked around, then stepped back and made a call on her phone. A few minutes later, a locksmith van pulled up. A young man got out, tool belt slung around his hip. There was no sound, but I didn't need audio. Her body language said everything, pointing at the door, nodding, gesturing to herself. Then the locksmith stepped back, clearly asking a question. She responded with a single point to her chest, then a wave toward the door. The locksmith shook his head, crossed his arms, and didn't touch a single tool. After a brief exchange, he got back into his van and left. Bree's mother stood there for a full minute before getting back into her car, jaw tight, hand shaking, as she pulled the door shut. I watched the footage twice more, letting the confirmation settle in, not because I needed it to believe, but because there's something unshakable about seeing a lie break down frame by frame. They knew it wasn't theirs. They tried anyway. And they kept trying even after they were told no. The next morning, I sent a copy of the video to my lawyer and added it to the evidence log. I attached a brief summary and labeled it, "Attempted unauthorized entry, witness footage." 2 hours later, Mallory called me. "We're well past the threshold," he said. "If you want to activate the clause, I'll file the executor letter this afternoon." I told him to wait. "Not yet," I said, "but keep it ready." That afternoon, I dropped off a small thank you basket at Mrs. Ellery's door. A handwritten card, a tin of cookies, a bag of ground coffee. She waved from her living room window as I walked away. Before heading back inside, I paused at the mailbox and pulled out a pale pink envelope. No return address. Inside was a note typed, "We'll see who the neighbors believe in the end." I folded the letter, slid it into my file, and added a new label. Threats, Anonymous. It started with a call to the front desk. Andrea, the office receptionist, appeared at my cubicle just before lunch, her face pinched with concern. "Corliss?" she whispered. "Your son just called. He said there's been a family emergency." My stomach dropped before my mind could catch up. I stood too quickly, heart kicking against my ribs. "Did he say what happened?" "No," she said. "Just that it was urgent. He insisted you come right away." I grabbed my coat and bag, trying to keep my breath steady. My thoughts raced ahead, a car accident, a hospital, someone missing. I fumbled my keys and almost dropped them. That was when my boss, Karen, stepped into view, blocking the elevator. "What's going on?" she asked calmly, eyes sharp. I told her the message. Her lips pressed together. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "But I'm walking you to the lobby." I nodded, grateful. Karen had seen me through worse. She didn't say much, but she always noticed the details most people missed. When we reached the lobby, I spotted Ezra immediately. He was pacing, phone in hand. Bree stood nearby, arms folded, not a tear in sight. No ambulance, no rush, no panic. Just waiting. My pulse slowed. I knew this feeling. The sense of a stage being set. Ezra looked up and dropped the act. "Mom," he said, walking toward me. "We needed to talk." I didn't move. "What happened?" "What's the emergency?" He hesitated. "We just thought if we said it was urgent, you'd actually come." Behind me, Karen took one slow step forward. "Excuse me." Bree turned, startled. Karen raised a brow. "You pulled one of my employees out of a regulated shift using a false medical emergency." Ezra opened his mouth, but I cut in. "We're done here," I said. "Ezra, if you need to talk, you can call, like everyone else." He looked at me surprised. "You weren't answering. Because you weren't saying anything worth hearing." Bree muttered something under her breath. Karen crossed her arms. I turned to her. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. I need some air." Karen nodded. "Take 15. Outside, the wind was sharp. Ezra followed me to the edge of the lot. "You're being cruel," he said. "We just wanted to explain." "No," I said, "you wanted to corner me. You wanted control of the narrative. We're your family. You keep saying that, like it's supposed to undo everything you've done." He stared at the pavement. "It didn't feel like this before. Before Dad died." "Before Dad died," I echoed. "There was someone reminding you to treat people like people." He flinched. I didn't apologize. "Whatever else you think this is," I said, "you need to understand something. I am not your backup plan. Not your extra square footage. Not a forgotten clause in your wife's birth plan. I wasn't trying to use you, he said softly. You were trying to manage me, I replied. That's worse. A gust of wind blew Bree's coat open, and she turned away. Ezra's face collapsed inward, not into tears, just confusion. As if he'd never considered the word no could last longer than a day. He stepped back, defeated. I turned around and walked back into the building. Karen was waiting with a thermos of fresh coffee and a raised eyebrow. Emergency handled, she asked. I nodded, fabricated, and dismissed. She handed me the coffee. Then let's get back to things that matter. I followed her upstairs where a folder sat on my desk with the tab labeled Staff Development, Relocation Interest Survey. I started with a manila folder, but it outgrew that in less than an hour. First came the screenshots group chats, forwarded by Andrea and Marcy, photos of Bree's Pinterest boards labeled Nursery Inspo, with captions like, once we repaint the master bedroom. I didn't comment, didn't save links, I saved entire threads. Context, tone, timestamps. Then came the emails. From the HOA, from my mortgage lender, from the county assessor. All reflecting requests I never made. One listed Bree's mother as alternate contact for the property tax mailing. Another showed a rejected change of address form that had been flagged and returned for lack of proper authorization. I printed everything. Next were the voicemails. I pulled up the app and played them one by one, labeling each before exporting Margaret, Threat 1, Ezra's, Plea 2, Bree, We Deserve This 3. They sounded like variations of the same song, some begging, some biting. None with accountability. The footage came next. From Mrs. Ellery. From my own security system. From the HOA office's entrance cam, the day Margaret stormed in after the permit hearing. She didn't see the sign that said audio recording in progress, but I did. I spliced clips, added subtitles, made a clean summary video. No editing for drama, just clarity. Finally, I added the documents Mallory and I filed, the inheritance clause, the notarized witness statements, the cease and desist letter that waited quietly in his outbox. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't retaliation. It was proof. I called the folder the archive. Then I backed it up on 2 encrypted drives and uploaded it to a cloud server under an alias. I printed 3 full sets and placed them in labeled envelopes. One went into the fireproof box in my closet. The second I hand-delivered to Mallory's office. His assistant gave me a solemn nod when I explained what it was. The third I mailed to my cousin Bernice out in Colorado. She was the only relative who'd ever called me just to talk, not to ask for something. I didn't tell her what was inside, only that she'd know when to open it, and that I hoped she never would. By the time I finished organizing, the sun had dipped behind the trees and cast long shadows across the hardwood floor. The house felt still, but not empty. It felt prepared. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, stronger than usual, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened the folder labeled HOA Future Planning and clicked through listings across 3 different counties. Small towns, larger yards, stricter zoning laws. Nothing final yet, but possible. Before bed, I opened the top drawer of my nightstand and removed the old photo Ezra, as a toddler on Henry's shoulders, both of them grinning through a day at the lake. I studied the boy in that photo, trying to reconcile him with the man who now lied to my face and tried to pry open my locks. Somewhere along the line, love had turned into assumption, and assumption had turned into entitlement. I placed the photo face down. Then I opened my closet and slipped the envelope marked The Archive. Primary copy into the fireproof box behind my birth certificate and Henry's discharge papers. When I closed the lid, it clicked with finality. The kind of sound you only hear once you've stopped asking for understanding and started preparing for reality. In the morning, I would meet the real estate agent. The coffee pot hissed and sputtered behind me As I read the message, a dark ribbon of steam curling up toward the cabinets. I'd meant to brew something warm and strong, but the bitterness that hit my nose before I even tasted it told me I'd left it too long. Still, I poured a cup. I had a feeling I'd need it. The email came from the school district subject residency verification inquiry. I almost deleted it, assuming it was part of the regular neighborhood updates. But then I saw the body of the message. Dear Ms. Devereaux, we are reaching out regarding your confirmed residence at my address. We've received conflicting reports of multiple minor students registered at your property, though records indicate you reside alone. I blinked at the screen, read it twice. Then again, Ezra. I pulled up the school portal. I still had login access from when Henry and I volunteered at the district years ago. I navigated through the enrollment section and found what I dreaded. Ezra had registered his 2 children, my grandchildren, under my home address. He'd used my property as a loophole, likely to get them into the closer, better-rated elementary school, the one Bree had mentioned in passing months ago, back when we were still pretending politeness. He hadn't asked, hadn't even hinted. He'd just written me into the paperwork the same way they'd tried to write me out of my house. I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee untouched, and stared at the screen. I wanted to feel guilt. I wanted to convince myself it was just a harmless trick, a corner cut for the sake of his children. But all I felt was a cold finality setting in. They'd used my name like it was a resource to borrow, like it belonged to them. I printed the email and placed it in the archive. Then I called the district office. The woman who answered was kind, professional. I gave her my statement, explained that the students in question didn't reside at my address and hadn't at any point. I confirmed that I was the sole owner and resident. I declined to elaborate further. Thank you, she said quietly. That confirms what we suspected. We'll begin the withdrawal process. That afternoon, Bree posted a vague status about unfair systems and displaced innocence. The comments rolled in fast, sorrowful emojis, angry gifs, friends offering to pray through this hard time. But I didn't flinch. Not when Ezra called and let the phone ring 8 times. Not when Bree's mother left a voicemail demanding I think about the children. Not when my doorbell rang and rang and rang. I didn't open it. Instead, I poured the cold coffee down the sink and brewed a fresh cup, strong, sharp, clean. No sugar, no cream, just clarity. That evening, I drafted a brief email to Mallory Enrollment Fraud, confirmed. Documentation attached. Please update inheritance clause file with timestamp. He replied within the hour, done. Copy stored in secondary location. Let me know when you're ready for next step. I folded the printed version of the school letter into an envelope and added it to the fireproof box. Later that night, I pulled a notepad from the drawer and wrote 4 words across the top. Lines they crossed first. And then, for the first time, I let myself add numbers. Not because I needed revenge, because I needed closure. And numbers didn't lie. It was waiting on my front step. A glass pie dish under plastic wrap, condensation fogging the inside. The note tucked beneath it said, "Thought of you. Bree. No return address. No apology." I stood there for a moment, keys still in hand, purse sliding off my shoulder. The scent of baked cherries hit me like a memory I'd buried. Cherry pie. I hadn't eaten cherry pie since 1983, the year Henry brought one home from the grocery store after forgetting my birthday. He'd rushed through the door, face flushed, handed me the box like it would fix everything. I hadn't even liked cherry pie then. I still don't. I brought it inside anyway, not out of sentiment, but surveillance. I wanted to see if they'd say anything, if they'd text, if Ezra would call pretending not to know. I slid it into the fridge right on the middle shelf and left it there untouched. 3 days later, Bree knocked on the door. I didn't answer. She lingered, muttering something into the Ring camera. "You got the pie right. I remembered it was your favorite." I sat on the couch, mug in hand, and watched her live on my phone. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. If she believed cherry pie was my favorite, it was because she never asked, never paid attention, or never cared. All three options led to the same result, a gift that meant nothing dressed up as a peace offering. I let it rot in silence. Each time I opened the fridge, the dish was there like a challenge. The crust dulled, the syrup congealed into something almost plastic. I could have thrown it out. But part of me wanted to see how long it would take to break down on its own, like a metaphor for something too obvious to say aloud. Ezra texted a few days later. "Breeze, trying. Could you at least acknowledge that I didn't respond?" Instead, I went back to my list, lines they crossed first. I added a bullet under the latest entry. Attempted guilt re-entry via dessert. Next to it, I scrawled, "Gift apology." On the 5th day, I finally took the pie out. I didn't unwrap it, just stood at the trash can and tilted the whole thing in. The dish clattered once against the bin's edge before settling at the bottom with a soft thud. A wet stain began blooming through the bag, dark and slow. I watched it for a second longer than I needed to. That night, I boiled pasta, opened a jar of sauce I'd made last fall, and sat by the window in silence. No one knocked. No one texted. The house was still, and for once that felt like enough. I opened my laptop and pulled up the real estate listings again. New town, new county, tighter community covenants. I emailed 3 inquiries and scheduled 2 walkthroughs. Then I opened the draft of my relocation letter to the HOA and reread the last line. "This home has served its purpose. It is time for peace to follow me elsewhere." I saved the file and closed the screen. From the kitchen, the garbage can gave off a faint, sticky scent of overripe cherries. I tied the bag shut and carried it out to the bin, locking the lid behind me. When I came back inside, a voicemail waited. Unknown number. A woman's voice. "Hi, Corliss. This is Julie from Sunset View Realty. I saw your inquiry. I think I might have just the place." The offer came in a manila envelope, sealed and crisp, with my name typed across the front, like it belonged in a better chapter. I had applied on a whim late one night after reading an article about housing advocacy and the way older women were often pushed out of their own homes by family or bureaucracy. It had hit too close to home. The article ended with a link, "We're hiring." I hadn't expected to hear back. But there it was, a formal offer from Hearth and Haven, a nonprofit based in Tucson. Program coordinator, full-time housing stipend included. I didn't even finish the coffee I was holding. I sat down and read the letter twice, 3 times. Then I said it aloud to the empty kitchen. Yes. It wasn't loud and I didn't shout it. Just a quiet agreement between myself and the world that had tried so long to fold me into the corners. Not anymore. That afternoon, I called Karen at work and gave my notice. She didn't sound surprised, just proud. "You're the kind of person who makes things grow," she said, "even when the soil isn't kind." I sent my acceptance to Hearth and Haven, scanned the documents, printed what needed signing. When I looked up, the house felt smaller, not worse. Just too familiar, too stained by voices I'd tried to ignore for too long. I walked from room to room, hand trailing the walls, taking stock. The corner where Henry used to stack his boots. The patch of sun that warmed the hardwood in the mornings. The cabinet above the stove where I once hid birthday cards I didn't know what to do with. I opened a new file labeled Exit Strategy. Then I called Julie from Sunset View Realty. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready to sell. I want it quiet. I want it fast." "Discreet?" she asked. As the grave, I replied. We scheduled the first walkthrough for the following Thursday. Until then, I started sorting, one drawer at a time. I packed the keepsakes, shredded the duplicates, and labeled the rest for donation. I didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of goodbye. It was a release. The cottage had given me something. It had shown me who I really was when I stopped performing for other people's comfort. I boxed up the last piece of inherited china and taped the flap shut. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the envelope labeled The Archive. Primary copy. I slid in the newest edition, the Arizona offer signed and dated. Then I wrote one more label across the bottom in black ink proof that I chose. The next morning, Ezra called again. I let it go to voicemail. His message was shorter this time. I heard you're selling. I don't understand what changed. I didn't reply, because I hadn't changed. I had just stopped waiting for someone else to say I mattered. Later that day, I met Julie outside the cottage. She walked through each room with quiet respect, commenting on the natural light, the good bones, the way the garden had been maintained. "It'll go quickly," she said. "I know," I replied. When she left, I stood in the doorway, staring out at the street, where I once saw Bree pacing with fake concern, where Margaret had pretended ownership, where Ezra had parked his car like a flag in conquered territory. I closed the door behind me. Back inside, I peeled the for sale sign from its cardboard backing. Tomorrow, I'd plant it in the yard myself. It was Bree's idea, but Ezra delivered the invitation. A resolution dinner, he called it. One night to clear the air, get everything back on track, stop all the drama. He texted it like it was a calendar reminder. 7 p.m. Friday. Location Aunt Ginny's house, dress casual. I didn't answer. But I packed the archive that same night. By Friday, it had grown thicker. Voice recordings, fraudulent forms, letters from the school district, copies of every HOA complaint and ruling. And right at the top in bold print, the notarized clause from Henry's will. The one Ezra had either forgotten or never bothered to read. I added a final touch before sealing the folder, a printed photo of the cherry pie rotting in my fridge. When I walked into Ginny's house, the room fell into a hush. They were all there, Ezra and Bree, of course, sitting side by side like news anchors preparing a statement. Bree's mother stood behind them, arms crossed. Aunt Ginny, cousin Tom, my mother's sister Vera, even old Uncle Patrick from New Hampshire. They'd called in the full jury. I carried the archive under my arm like a briefcase. No bag, no purse, no extra accessories, just the file. I didn't speak. Not yet. Ginny gestured toward the long dining table already set with pot roast and buttered rolls. A second roast rested in a slow cooker on the kitchen island, and I caught the unmistakable scent of Bree's lavender hand soap lingering near the napkins. I sat at the far end of the table and placed the folder square in the center. Ezra stood, cleared his throat. "I asked everyone here tonight," he began, "because things have gone too far. Misunderstandings hurt feelings." I opened the folder. "Corliss?" he said, frowning slightly. "Can we talk first?" "No," I said. "You've been talking. It's my turn." I pulled out the first sheet, the letter from the school district. I passed it to Aunt Ginny. "This is what happened when Ezra and Bree registered their kids under my address without asking." I handed the HOA violation report to Uncle Patrick. "This is the permit they tried to fake, using my home as a short-term rental." Next came the change of address forms, the voicemail transcripts, the property access footage, screenshots, the security camera stills Margaret with her ring of keys. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply laid down the truth document by document, across the table like playing cards no one wanted to see. By the time I reached the notarized inheritance clause, the room had quieted again, but it was a different kind of silence. This one hummed with realization. I tapped the clause once. If Ezra is found to have used coercion or manipulation to obtain property or financial advantage from me, I read aloud he forfeits any claim to inheritance. No one spoke. I placed the pie photo on top of the final stack. This, I said, was supposed to be a peace offering. They thought cherry was my favorite. It never was. They never asked. Ezra opened his mouth, then closed it. Bree stared down at her hands. I'm not here for revenge, I said quietly. I'm here because I deserve to be seen. And if you've been told otherwise, you deserve the truth too. I pushed the folder to the center of the table and stood. I'm selling the house. I'm moving to Arizona. And I don't need approval or forgiveness to do either. As I turned toward the door, Aunt Ginny reached out and gently touched my arm. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded and stepped outside into the night. It sold in 5 days. Above asking. All cash. 30-day close. Julie called me with a grin in her voice. They want it as is, no contingencies. They fell in love with the light in the front room. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I knew the light she meant. I'd fallen in love with it too before anyone else ever stepped foot in that house with their measuring tapes and assumptions. That night, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and opened the kitchen drawer, the one I'd labeled spare months ago. Inside were 3 keys, 1 I'd used, and 2 I hadn't touched since I changed the locks. One still had a red tag marked Ezra. I placed them one by one on the cutting board and held them steady while I pressed down with the bolt cutter. Clean cuts, cold metal, no ceremony. I slid the halves into a padded envelope and addressed it to Ezra. No note, just pieces. It felt fair. A week later, the funds cleared. I transferred a portion to my new account in Tucson. The rest stayed where it was quiet and untouchable. I booked a moving service, scheduled the final walkthrough, and canceled the utilities with a flick of the mouse. There was no grief, only stillness. The kind of stillness I'd mistaken for loneliness most of my life. Now I understood. This was what it meant to live without someone pressing elbows into your ribs, trying to shrink you into space you'd already paid for. I was brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter when my phone lit up. Voicemail. Ezra. I didn't want to listen, but I did. You'll regret this, he said. His voice was low. Not angry, not tearful, just tired. I hope whatever you're chasing out there in the desert makes it worth it. I pressed delete without replaying, not because it didn't sting, but because I'd already lived the regret. Years of it. The slow erosion of self that comes from being the reliable one, the invisible one, the one who always understood. No more. In my last morning inside the house, I walked from room to room like I was blessing it, or maybe setting it free. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Instead, I left 3 things behind. On the kitchen counter, a small potted plant I'd grown from a cutting 2 years ago. On the windowsill, a pebble from the first beach I visited alone after Henry died. And in the mailbox, a single note handwritten on a yellow post-it. This was never yours to take. The moving truck arrived at noon. By 4:30, the last box was loaded. I closed the front door, gently, locked it. Once then placed the final copy of the key in Julie's hand. Keep it, I said. Just in case. She smiled. Tucson will be lucky to have you. I smiled back. That night I stayed in a small roadside motel 2 towns over. I ate a quiet dinner from the diner next door, warmed my hands on a styrofoam cup of coffee, and opened my laptop one last time. The confirmation email was there. Hearth and Haven. Orientation begins Monday. I closed the screen and settled into bed, the hum of the heater soft against the quiet. No voices, no footsteps, no keys turning in doors that weren't theirs, just silence. And sleep that finally came without permission. The key fit smooth and clean with no hesitation. I still turn it slowly, half expecting resistance. But the door opens easily, and the scent of freshly ground coffee greets me before the desert sun even has a chance to warm the floorboards. It's been a year. The walls are a soft white, not because someone else preferred it that way, but because I did. The windows are uncurtained in the mornings, letting in the full blaze of Arizona daylight. I don't worry who's looking in. There's nothing I'm hiding, and no one I'm hiding from. My name is on the mailbox on the lease, on the volunteer roster at Hearth and Haven. And this time, no one has tried to replace it. There are no spare keys, just mine resting on a hook by the door I chose. Sometimes when I come home late from work, I pause before walking inside, just to feel it. The fact that this space, this life is entirely mine. My coworkers knock before entering my office. Even when the door is wide open, they knock. It took me a few weeks to stop feeling startled every time they asked, "Do you have a minute?" instead of just walking in with their needs first. My neighbor Alma brings coffee every Thursday morning. Not tea, not pie. Coffee strong and dark, just the way I like it. The first time she handed me the paper cup, she didn't ask for sugar or cream or clarification. She just smiled and said, "This one's yours." We sit together on the patio, sometimes talking about the cacti she's trying to save from frostbite, or the way birds perch on the railing just before sunrise. She doesn't ask why I moved here. I don't ask why she's lived alone since 1989. We just let each other exist. That feels like the rarest kind of kindness. Ezra tried to call again around the holidays. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted the message before it even finished syncing. There's nothing left to explain, and I no longer feel obligated to carry silence just to make other people more comfortable. My phone is quieter now. I keep the notifications off. When I do hear from someone, it's usually a client from Hearth and Haven, someone who needs help setting up a security deposit or understanding a lease. I walk them through it, voice steady, no rush. Because I know what it feels like to have the keys to something you thought you'd never earn. Sometimes I'll walk through the front door, set down my bag, and just sit on the floor in the center of the room. Not to meditate, not to reflect, just to be. To hear the absence of footsteps I didn't invite. To enjoy the silence that doesn't sting. To feel ownership without needing permission. The house is small, but I know where every creak in the wood lives. I've fixed the faucet. I've painted the back porch. I've learned the rhythm of the neighbor's sprinkler system and how to time my laundry to avoid the heat. I've kept every copy of the archive, though I haven't opened it in months. It lives in a locked drawer at work, not because I need it anymore, but because once I did. The only key to that drawer is the same one I wear on a chain around my neck, and I don't plan on making a copy.